How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Hey, Daf 35 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, oh my gosh, Lamed Hey of Masechta Menachos. I'm pretty sure. I don't think that this is an exaggeration. I don't think that this is an exaggeration to say that you could probably spend your entire life learning Daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Menachos. I could say with probably 90 or even more % level of confidence that there are people who their entire life is this stuff. There are people who, like, tefillin is their mitzvah. They make tefillin. They have a tefillin shop. They love tefillin, and they probably know this stuff inside and out. They are probably always learning new things about this daf. I saw some video earlier on about, I saw Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Maybe he was getting a new pair of tefillin or something. I don't know. They asked him something. I think they asked him about if he puts on Rabbeinu Tam. He said, maybe quoted the Gra or something, that basically if you want to be yotze the mitzvah of tefillin, the chol hashitos, you have to put on like 65 pairs of tefillin. That's like how, and it's pretty much, I think, probably all based on this stuff. There's just so many different shitas about basically everything to do with tefillin, and that's basically all on like this stuff, I think. And we are obviously barely gonna scratch the surface. My goal for this daf is for us to learn daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Menachos together. First of all, we also have to do Lamed Daled Amud Beis. So first of all, for us to learn through the daf together, for us to see kind of, we're going to touch on all the sugyas, at least to be, I hope that we'll kind of touch all the big sugyas and all kind of the big things. Hopefully we'll touch on some level. And I highly recommend hopping on YouTube, just searching around for how to make tefillin, and learn from the experts. Right, as I said earlier, there are likely people who have dedicated their whole life to this one daf of Gemara, and even on a lesser level, there are people that they're experts who make tefillin, who live tefillin. You could find them on YouTube, see how they do their craft, and it's fascinating, in my opinion, and there's a lot to be learned there. So I definitely recommend that. That being said, daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Menachos is a mind-blowing daf. So let's get going on it. Okay, I have 2, 4, 6, 7 kind of sections here. It's funny, they don't even feel like sugyas, they just feel like a list of like all the things we're going to learn. The parashiyot of the tefillin, that's tefillin shel, tefillin shel rosh, that in that includes also the world famous machlokas between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, which are really just 2 of the shitas that are out there about the parashiyos of tefillin, but those are the most popular ones, of course, right? People put on Rashi tefillin, Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. We are going to learn about that machlokas today. We're going to learn about the different parts of the tefillin. There is the titura. We will learn about what the titura is, and all sorts of things around that. The ma'abarta of the tefillin, we will learn about the shin of the tefillin shel rosh, the grooves in the tefillin shel rosh, that tefillins need to be square, the straps of the tefillin. Each one of these topics is a whole world. So I hope that we will at least be able to jump in and explore all of these shitas and at least all of these topics, and at least kind of get our hands wet. Get our hands wet, kind of know how much we don't know how much there is more to learn, and at least hopefully able to touch the big topics over here when it comes to making tefillin, the mitzvah of tefillin. Friends, let's jump in and let's learn together daf Lamed Hey and also half of Lamed Daled of Masechta Menachos. Friends, we begin on daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis of Masechta Menachos on the third line of the daf. The third line of Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbi said, Yochel yichtevim al Daled Oris. Okay, this is talking about the tefillin shel rosh. That the tefillin shel rosh is written on 4 parchments. We'll see those in a second. Vanichim b'daled batim, and put them in 4 compartments. B'daled oris. Is it possible that the 4 compartments will be made with 4 different hides, right? Did you ever think about the Tefillin shel rosh, right? We're going to see all about the Tefillin shel rosh today, right? There are those different like grooves that we're gonna talk about today. Basically, the Tefillin shel rosh is all these different compartments, and a different parsha goes in each compartment. So, is it possible that you'll have 4 cloths? You'll write the parshas. Right? There's Kadesh, Vayakiv Yacha, Shema, and Vayim Shema, and you'll write each one on a separate cloth. Put them each in its own compartment, each with their own separate hide. As a remembrance, a single remembrance between your eyes. Zikaron echad amaytilcha v'lo beis v'gimel zichronos. Only one remembrance between your eyes, not multiple remembrances. Okay, it's new. So how so? Kosvan al dalet oris. So you write the 4 parshiyos of the Tefillin shel rosh. Now, the Tefillin shel rosh and the Tefillin shel yad have the same parashiyos in them. Again, Kadesh, Vayokiv Yacha, which are Kadesh and Vayokiv Yacha are I believe they're the maftir of Parshas Bo. I think they're both the maftir of Parshas Bo. They're at the end of Parshas Bo. I think Perikid Gimel of Sefer Shmos. And then Shema and Vayim Shema. So those parshas are in both the Tefillin shel yad and the Tefillin shel rosh. The difference is that in the Tefillin shel yad, as we'll see in a few minutes, in the Tefillin shel yad, it's all written on one long cloth. In the Tefillin shel rosh, it is written on 4 separate cloths. So you write them on 4 separate cloths, manichem b'dalet batim, and put them into 4 compartments in the Tefillin shel rosh, be'or echad, which is all made out of one hide. Vim kosban be'or echad, and if you wrote them, okay, this is a little bit esoteric. If you wrote all 4 parshas for the Tefillin shel rosh on one long cloth, I guess kind of similar to what you do for the shel rosh, for the shel yad. V'nicha medalet batim, and they're put in 4 batim, right? You basically you have this one long cloth, and somehow you manage to get them into the 4 separate batim. Yotza, you are Yotze. But you'd have to have enough space between each of the parashot on the cloth so that you'd be able to like make cuts into them so you could fit them into different compartments. It's very esoteric. Chacham say you wouldn't need to make these large gaps between the parashas on the cloth. And everyone agrees that you put some kind of a thread of sorts between each of the batim in the shel rosh. I'm also not like super clear on that either. Okay, this I'm familiar with. If you can't tell the etches between them, they are psulos. Okay, one sec. Okay, that was a lot there. At the end, let's look at some photos. Okay, so here is some stuff. On the left side, what do you see? The left side, what you see is Tefillin shel rosh in the earlier stages, right? In the not yet complete, actually kind of it's no longer just a raw piece of hide. It's already been, it's already starting to take shape. It's not the very beginning, but it does not look like tefillin yet. What do we see here? We see that there's one piece of hide that kind of 4 separate compartments have been pushed into this one piece of hide. You can actually, if you check out on YouTube, you can see how they do it. They basically knock these like heavy metal kind of things to knock out these 4 compartments, and then they like let them dry and they get pretty hard. So we see that there's this one piece of hide that basically has 4 compartments that are kind of built into it. Now, if you notice on the right side of that kind of raw-ish hide, there's just that big square. That square is we're going to learn about it in a little bit, what's called the titura. The titura is ultimately then going to be folded underneath to kind of close it up, and is going to be the base of the tefillin, right? So remember that square chunk that's off to the right side of the hide, because once we're looking at what we recognize as tefillin, it's going to look very different, but that's ultimately what's going to be closing at the tefillin on the bottom. Now on the right, what you see is the parashiyos of the Tefillin shel rosh. So they are kind of long parashiyos, kind of horizontally long. And for the Tefillin shel rosh, they are 4 separate parashiyos. For the Tefillin shel rosh, there are 4 separate klafs, and each klaf goes into its own compartment in the Tefillin shel rosh. In the Tefillin shel yad, however, it's just one long horizontal klaf. It's not a long vertical. They're not written one on top of the other, but one next to the other, and then they're rolled up and put in the Tefillin shel yad, which is just one compartment. It's not 4 compartments. I'd imagine it's probably less complex to make the Tefillin shel yad than it is to make the Tefillin shel rosh. So in the Tefillin shel yad, it's just one long parchment that's rolled up and put inside of the Tefillin shel yad. Now what you see here are these grooves, right? These are the grooves that the Gemara was talking about, and we're going to learn a little bit more about them later. But what you can see is, since each of those boxes are actually literally their own box, as we saw in the previous slide, that it's all one hide, and now you also see that like that titura has already been folded underneath and closed. That slab is already folded underneath. So there's all one hide, and you see the grooves in the shel rosh for where each of the boxes are. At this point already, they've obviously been pressed together and made square, which we're going to learn about a little bit later, that it has to be square. But here, so here you can see those grooves in the shel rosh that we are talking about. Of course, in the shel yad, there are not grooves because it's only one compartment. Okay. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ketzad kozvon tefillah shel yad. Okay, now how does it work for the tefillin shel yad? Kozva al or echad. So as I mentioned a minute ago, unlike the tefillin shel rosh, where all the klafs, there are 4 separate klafs, for the tefillin shel yad, it's one long klaf. Ve'im kosva ba'arba oris ve'nicha b'bayis echad. Now, if he did take 4 separate klafs and he put it into the shel yad, into one bayis, he's yotze, however, v'tzarich l'dabek, but you would have to somehow connect the 4 klafs together. That it says that it should be a single sign, so therefore they have to be single, and not just for others, but licha al yodcha. So the tefillin shel yad is one box externally, that people see it as one box, but also internally, you should know, right? Even though, right, the parashas are inside, nobody else can see it, only you know what's in there. Still, even le'os, lecha le'os, it should be a singular sign, one long klaf lecha, even if it's just for you. So kshem she'os achas mibachutz, just like it should look like one box from the outside, unlike the shel rosh, which looks like 4 boxes from the outside, it should look like one box from the outside. Kach os achas mibifnim, it should also be one klaf inside, and therefore if you have multiple klafs, you should bring them, you should connect them. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi says you don't need to connect them. So if you have 4 separate klafs, you could just put them into the shel yad, and that's fine according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda admits to me that in the following case, Yehuda Rabbi Yehuda Bribi, the great Rabbi Yehuda, she'im ein lo tefillin shel yad v'yesho shtei tefillin shel rosh, that if a fellow doesn't have 2, if he doesn't have a tefillin shel yad, he doesn't have a tefillin shel rosh and a tefillin shel yad, he manages, what he has is 2 tefillin shel roshes. What does he do? Can he hack it together? Can it work? Shetole or al achas me'en. So what you do is you'll take one piece of hide, and you'll take one of the tefillin shel roshes, and you'll take a piece of hide, and you'll kind of cover it up so that it looks like one box. Umanicha, and you can put it on. And what Rabbi Yossi is saying is that in that case, Rabbi Yehuda would admit that the parashiyos could remain separate, right? I mean, you have it's a tefillin shel rosh, so even if you cover it with one hide to make it look like one box from the outside, the fact of the matter is, on the inside, it's 4 separate compartments, which means that the parashiyos are in 4 separate compartments. And nonetheless, says Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Yehuda admits to me that in this case, it would be kosher just put on the tefillin. He'll cover it with hide on the outside, and it's kosher now. Moda anu pluktayu. To which Gemara says, what do you mean Rabbi Yehuda is moda? What do you mean? In this case, he's what? That means he's basically, that's literally the machlokas. The machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi is literally this: when you have a tefillin, that even though on the outside it looks like one, right, tefillin shel yad, even though on the outside it looks like one compartment, still Rabbi Yehuda says they would have to be connected on the inside. So what you've done is you made it from the outside look like one compartment. I mean, you have this tefillin shel rosh that you're kind of MacGyvering. Does that make sense? You're kind of hacking together to make. You have this tefillin shel rosh that you're hacking together to make it a tefillin shel yad by just making it look like one from the outside, by putting some hide on the outside and saying, okay, look, it's a tefillin shel yad. But from the inside, it's totally tefillin shel rosh, and all the parshas are separate. That's literally Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that in this case, you would have to connect all of the parashiyos. What do you mean that in this case, Rabbi Yehuda agrees? That's literally what he's arguing about. If he agrees in this case, then where does he disagree? So Rava says, Rava, rather midvar shel Rabbi Yossi, Chazer bar Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, from what Rabbi Yossi says, we could tell that Rabbi Yehuda has actually been chozer from what he said. He's changed his mind to agree with Rabbi Yossi that actually you don't need to connect all the four parashiyos together. And if you have the four separate parashiyos by tefillin shel yad, you could just put them into tefillin shel yad, and that is acceptable. Ini, is it really so that a tefillin shel rosh could be MacGyvered? I don't know if that makes sense. What does it mean to MacGyver something? I think to hack it together? Sure. For now it does. We can figure out if it actually means that later. For now it means to hack it together. Is it really true that tefillin shel rosh could be MacGyvered to be a tefillin shel yad? V'ashalach Rav Chananya mishmei Rav Yochanan. Rav Chananya sent the name of Rav Yochanan. Tefillah shel yad osin shel rosh. That a tefillin shel yad can be upgraded to a tefillin shel rosh. V'sharosh ein osin shel yad, but a tefillin shel rosh cannot be downgraded to a tefillin shel yad. L'fisha ein moridin mikdusha chamur l'kedusha kala, because we can't downgrade from a kedusha chamur, from a greater kedusha to a lesser kedusha. Why is tefillin shel rosh considered a greater kedusha than tefillin shel yad? Rashi gives two suggestions. One is because we're going to learn about, I think technically on Lamed Hey Amud Beis, we're not going to get that far today. We'll get there tomorrow. That on the tefillin shel rosh, well, on your tefillin in general, it says shakai, it says shin, as shin dalad yud. And on the tefillin shel rosh, there are two out of three of those letters. We're going to learn all about the shin that's on the tefillin shel rosh. And there's also a dalad that we're going to learn about tomorrow in the knot, in the kesher of the tefillin shel rosh. There's a dalad. So there's a shin and there's a dalad. And then on the shel yad, right, the shin and dalad are on the shel rosh. On the shel yad, there's a yud. There's a yud by where it's connected to the bias. There's a yud. I think we'll learn about it tomorrow. So it says the name of God, right? Shin dalad yud on the tefillin. The shin and the dalad, 2 out of 3 of the letters are on the shel rosh. Therefore, it's a higher level of kedusha. Alternatively, also as we're going to learn about tomorrow, that viro kol ame aretz ki Hashem nikra alecha v'yaru mimeka. And as Rabbi Eliezer Agadol says, we learned about it already in Masechta Brachos, maybe somewhere else too. I can't remember. That elu tefillin shel barosh, that these are tefillin shel barosh. So the tefillin shel barosh apparently are a little bit more special than tefillin shel yad. So Rabbi Yochanan says you can upgrade from tefillin shel yad to tefillin shel rosh, but you can't downgrade from tefillin shel rosh to be tefillin shel yad. So how could it be that we're talking about, he only has 2 tefillin shel roshes? He can use it as a tefillin shel yad. He's just got to cut. What do you mean he can use it as a tefillin shel yad? He can't do that. That's the whole point. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. You can't do that. Lo kasha, it's no problem. It depends. Yeah, if they're old, i.e. if they've already been worn and used as a tefillin shel rosh, that's correct. They cannot be downgraded to a tefillin shel yad. But if they have not yet been used as a tefillin shel rosh, it is not too late to utilize them and change their purpose to be a tefillin shel yad. What about according to the opinion says azmana milsa, that just setting something aside as something, declaring something as something is enough to make it that thing, i.e. by saying that this is going to be a tefillin shel rosh, and by going through the painstaking work of developing a tefillin shel rosh, that would be enough of an indication that this is a tefillin shel rosh, and it would be too late. So then how can it? So even if it hasn't yet been used, just the fact that it was designated to be a tefillin shel rosh makes it a tefillin shel rosh. So then how could it be used as a tefillin shel yad? The asni alayu meikara. Well, it would be that. Therefore, we would have to say it's talking about a situation where he had already stipulated meikara. That kilu, yes, he made it as a tefillin shel rosh, but with the stipulation that if it's going to need to be a tefillin shel yad, so be it. It could be a tefillin shel yad. So in that case, because he had made that stipulation meikara, it can then be made into a tefillin shel yad, even if you say hazmana milsa, but here, since he had made a tanai about it, we go based on his tanai, and it can be made in a tefillin, into a tefillin shel yad. Friends, and now we get to the world famous machlokes Rashi and Tosfos about tefillin. Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Here we go. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ketzad Sidron, what is the order of the parashiyot in the tefillin shel rosh? That is the machlokes between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. What are Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin? They're the same thing. The difference is that in the tefillin shel rosh, what is the order in which they are inserted into the compartments? That's the whole thing. Kadesh li vayekiv. So the Gemara says, nobody argues on the Gemara. The question is how to interpret the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Ketzad Sidron, what's their order? Kadesh li. Okay, at the end of Parshas Bo, we have the parsha of Kadesh li, followed by vayekiv yacho. Miyomin, that is on the right. Shema vayoim shema, and then Shema and vayoim shema, mismol on the left. V'atani ipchop, we learn in the Brayso the opposite. Kadesh li and vayekiv yacho on the left, and Shema vayoim shema on the right. It says Abai, no, not to worry. It's perspective. When we're talking about the perspective of the reader, the person, the outsider looking at the person who's wearing the tefillin, so then it's right to left. It's Kadesh vayokiv yacho on the right, and Shema vayim shema on the left. When it's from the perspective of the person wearing the tefillin, so Shema and Kadesh and vayokiv yacho are on his left, and Shema vayim shema are on his right. Ve'akore kore kisidron, and when we mentioned over here just now, right to left, Kadesh vayokiv yacho Shema vayim shema, it is the reader reading them in order. Kadesh, meaning we're talking about from the right, Kadesh vayokiv yacho, that's from the perspective from the right, the perspective of the reader. Okay, now says Rashi. The Akore Kore Kisidron, says Rashi, 5 lines from the bottom of Rashi. Kiseder she'ein ksuvim b'Torah, in the order that they are written in the Torah. Mukto, me'ucher, me'ucher. Earlier, later. So, okay, so from the perspective of the onlooker, so all the way on the right compartment will be Kadesh, and then Vayakiv Yacha, and then Shema, and then Vayim Shema, all in the order that they are written in the Torah. Kadesh at the beginning, I believe, of chapter 13 of the book of Exodus. That's what Shmos is, right? Exodus, I think. Shmos. And then right after that, I think, from Pasuk Yud or something of the 13th chapter of Exodus is Vayakiv Yacha. And then in the 6th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy is Shema, and in the 11th chapter of Deuteronomy is Vayim Shema. So Kadesh Vayakiv Yacha Shema Vayim Shema, that is Lefi Rashi, Givaldik. Okay. Tosfos. Now, Hillel Lester, I don't know if you remember this, but I do. 6 years ago, February 2020, you and I had discussed this Tosfos, and here we are again, 6 years later, February 2026, learning this Tosfos finally inside. It took us 6 years, but we made it. Friends, Tosfos asks, specifically Rabbeinu Tam asks, I believe Rabbeinu Tam asks. Does Rabbeinu Tam ask? Yes, Rabbeinu Tam asks. He asks, based on the Gemara that we're going to learn later on in the Masechta, and Daf Tzadiches, by the menorah. The question is, how do we know that the menorah is in the Heichal east-west? Maybe it's north-south. The answer is because on the menorah there is one particular ner. There's one particular candle. It's called the Ner Ma'aravi. It's called the Ner Ma'aravi, the westernmost candle. And being that there is one candle that's westernmost, that means that all the other 6 candles are not westernmost. There's the one candle to the west, and then there's all the others. Then there's the other 6. And that's how we know that the menorah is east-west. Because if it was north-south, then they'd all be the same distance from meaning because it's near Maravi, because if it's in the Heichal, the closest to Hashem, Hashem is in the Kodesh HaKodashim, so there's one that's closest to Hashem, that means that it's going east-west, and the one that's on the west is the one that's closest to the Heichal. If it was north-south, they'd all be equidistant from the Heichal. So Tosfos asks, based on that you see, when we're looking to try to figure out the direction of something, all we need to know is one of them. If there's one near Maravi, so that one's all the way to the west, and then that means all the 6 kind of fall in line, and they're to the east. So here also, if you wanted to teach us that from the right, it's Kadesh Vayakiviacha Shma V'Hoyim Shama. So all we needed to know is that from the right, we start with Kadesh, and then Vayakiviacha Shma V'Hoyim Shama, they all kind of fall in line. So all we needed to know is one, and the other 3. Tosfos says it's peculiar, Rabbeinu Tam says it's peculiar that we're saying from the right, Kadesh Vayakiviacha, and from the left, Shema V'Hoyim Shama. Again, if we just wanted to know direction, just tell me where to start. Just tell me one of them. Kadesh, okay, fine. From the right, it's Kadesh. Okay, that one's all the way on the right, then the other ones are to the left. Rabbeinu Tam says that there's too much information being given to us over here that the Gemara wants us to do more with it than just to say that from right to left, it's Kadesh Vayakiviacha Shema V'Hoyim Shema. And therefore, rather, Rabbeinu Tam learns it as being Miyamin, Kadesh, and Vayakiviacha. So from the right, it's Kadesh. The one to the left of that is Vayakiviacha. And then, Umismol, and now from the left side, you have Shema, and to the right of that is Vayam Shema. So let's see what that looks like. So I have here a slide with Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So you see Rashi, in the Rashi slide, he just starts from the right and goes straight to the left in the chronological order from the way that they're written in the Torah. Kadesh, followed on the left of that is Vayakiviacha, to the left is Shema, to the left is Vayam Shema. Rabbeinu Tam, however, starts from the right with Kadesh, and to the left of that is Vayakiviacha, but then he goes now to the left side, and he has Shema, and to the right of that is Vayam Shema. Friends, that if you've been hearing your whole life about Rashi Tefillin or Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, there you have it. That's Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. Rashi Tefillin is the parashiyot 1, 2, 3, 4. Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin is parashiyot 1, 2, 4, 3. That's the Gan Tzach. And for that reason, people have 2 pairs of tefillin, and they wear the Rashi tefillin first, and then they, at some point during davening, they take off the Rashi tefillin, and they switch it for Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Friends, that's the world-famous machlokes, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, with regard to tefillin. Omer Chanan al Marab, Hichli Parshosel Psulos. If he changes around the order of the parshas, psulis. Amar Abai says, Abai lo amarin ela gavyosa livaraisa, says Abaye that when we say that it's possible if you move around the order, that's only if the inside ones are brought to the outside of Vayosa legavyosa, and the outside ones brought to the inside. So if we look at, let's say, the parshas according to Rashi, so that would mean that if the inside ones, Vayakiviacha and Shema, are put into outside slots, and the outside ones, Kadesh and Vayam Shema, are put into inside slots, so then that's going to be a problem. Aval, Gavyosa, Gavyosa, Varyosa, the Varyosa, but to switch around the internal ones with each other, or the external ones with each other, right, to make Vayakiviacha and Shema, which are internal, to switch those around, or Kadesh and Vayam Shema, which are external, to switch those around, that would be acceptable. Amalei Rava says, Tabaya, I don't understand why. Maishna Gavyosa livaraisa uvaraisa ligavyosa delo. What's the when you said that there's an issue with making the outside ones inside and the inside ones outside? Why? The achterboy lemerze avira lo kachazia viha de lo boy lemerze avira kachazia. The issue is because the outer parshas that are supposed to be on the outside and see the air and get some air, be exposed to the air, they're no longer being exposed to the air. And the ones that are supposed to be on the inside and not being exposed to the air, obviously when we say exposed to air, it doesn't literally mean both exposed to the air because they're inside of the compartments and closed up. However, meaning just in the positions that are closer to the air. And so the ones that are outside are supposed to be inside. The ones that are supposed to be inside are not going to be outside. Okay, the issue is the ones that are supposed to be closer to the air, external are now internal. The ones that are internal are now external. But but why does it make a difference when now you switch around the ones that are right the Kadesh and Vayim Shema, which are two external ones, so you switch them around. Well, namiach de boy le merze avir de yamin kachazi avir de small, but the small kachazi avir de yamin. Still, kilu Kadesh is supposed to be be exposed to the air, so to speak, on the right side of the tefillin, and Vayim Shema is supposed to be on the left side of the tefillin. Now they're going to be exposed to opposite air sides. No, rather, says Rabbi, it makes no difference. Kilu, what's the point? Abaye had this whole scheme of when it's okay to switch around the parashiyos, when it's not. Rava says, no. We have the order of the parashiyos. You're not allowed to switch them around. However, just to point out, by the way, we just saw the shitas of Rashi and Rabbi Tam. There are other shitas as well, but these are the most famous ones. Okay, Chaver, for this next chunk of Gemara, basically every line is an olam umlo o. Every single line is a whole world. So I think I'm just going to read it through once, and then we'll go over things. Titura the tefillin halacha l'Moshe misinai. The titura of the tefillin are halacha l'Moshe misinai. Amar Abai says Abai ma'abarta the tefillin halacha l'Moshe misinai. Amar Abai says Abai shin shel tefillin halacha l'Moshe misinai. V'tzarich she'agia charetz l'makom hatefer, and the grooves that we saw about earlier need to get down to the bottom. The grooves need to go all the way down to the base, basically, where the stitching of the tefillin are. Okay, we'll stop there. Once the grooves are recognizable, that is sufficient. Okay, friends, before we go into kind of each thing at a time, let us take a look at kind of what are the components of the tefillin. So here we have a tefillin shel rosh. So the white arrow is pointing to the box at the top, the box, that cube with the shin on it, with the four-legged shin that we'll learn about in a minute. So the white arrow is pointing to the box, which is called, as you can see in the key on the left, on the bottom left, the white arrow is called the kitzitza. That's what that box at the top is called. It's called the kitzitza. The pink arrow is pointing to the ma'abarta. The ma'abarta is kind of the area that the strap comes through, which means that if you remember earlier in an earlier slide, I'll pull it up, right? When you see this rawhide over here, there's that big slab off to the right. That slab is what's back in our photo now. That slab has already been folded over around to the bottom, leaving enough room for the straps to go through. And then the room for the straps to go through is what's called the ma'abarta. Also notice that there's an etch, that there's kind of a notch, like a semicircle notch, where the strap is going through, kind of where the pink arrow is pointing to, kind of right below there. If you notice, there's like a semicircle notch. There's a reason for that. We will get to that. So that's what's called the ma'abarta, right? That. And let's move on for a second. Again, so the blue arrow on the left is pointing to the titura. So the titura, so in creating the ma'abarta, the titura, which is that extra slab of hide, the titura was folded over and beneath the tefillin in order to then be able to close it. And it was folded over with enough room for the straps to be able to get through, creating the ma'abarta for the straps to get through, and it's folded over to the bottom. And then so where the kitzitza kind of ends at the bottom by the base, by the titura essentially, you can see that there is some stitching. And then that stitching basically gidin, as we learned about gidin the other day. Those gidim, those sinew threads, are used to then stitch the tefillin shut, basically to stitch the titura from the top and also from the bottom to stitch it shut. Okay, great. I think that those are all the things that I wanted to discuss on this slide. So now, Tosfos in the top, the Tosfos titura. So he says there at the last two lines of the Tosfos, he says, "Umashma mitoch perish akuntris," that it's mashma from Rashi. Just in case, the kuntris, the notebook, of course, is what they referred to as Rashi, the notebook. She'abotim ve'atitura, that the box, the ktsitsa, and the titura, this whole thing, akol me'or echad, it's all from one piece of hide, as we had seen on that earlier slide. Ve'eino hagin kain, but this is not the minig. This is not the minig. So Tosfos says that Rashi, according to Rashi, this tefillin that we just saw, this box, is all one piece of hide. Tosfos says that is not the minig. So now let's look at the Mishnah Berurah for a second. The Mishnah Berurah says, regarding this one piece of hide, machatichos or tfurim yachad, that if you take pieces of hide and you stitch them together to make one unit of hide, to make the tefillin from them, says the Magen Avram that they should be considered like one. Stitching together hide should be considered like one hide. That you also says the Chasam Sofer that stitching them together should be fine. But if you used glue instead of stitching, so then the Chasam Sofer is stringent there. In the Chai Adam mashma du adin im devukas bedevek. That the Chai Adam, the Orzaru, so you can even use glue to connect different pieces of hide. And says the Mishnah Berurah, and this is the minig in where we live in Europe, that different pieces of hide would be stitched together or glued together to make one unit that then tefillin would be made from. However, and this is the end of the Mishnah Berurah. This is where we're going to end the Mishnah Berurah. Nonetheless, lechatchila roi v'nachon lasos meor echad mamish. But lechatchila, you should make the tefillin from one piece of hide. Ki yesh machmirin, because there are those who are stringent v'sofen and hold the lo ma'ani b'chatichos tfuros yachad o medubakos bedevek, that it is insufficient to use pieces of hide that have been stitched or glued together. So I thought it was very interesting, is shtikol halacha l'maisa over that, to see how the Mishnah Berurah, to see what he says, that technically it sounds like you should be able to use different pieces of hide that have been either stitched or glued together. That should be okay, but still, lichatchila, you should try and use just one piece of hide. So again, v'amar Rav Chanan amar Rav, so it says Rav Chanan amar Rav, titura, the tefillin alach l'moshe misina, that the titura that we just discussed is alach l'moshe misina. Amar Abai ma'abarta, the tefillin alach l'moshe misina, that the ma'abarta that we discussed earlier, where the strap goes through, is also alach l'moshe misina. V'amar Abai says Abai, shin shel tefillin alach l'moshe misina, that the shin of the tefillin is halacha l'moshe mi Sinai. Let's just hop over to Tosfos quick. Tosfos in the Dibra Maschil shin shel tefillin, the second Dibra Maschil shin shel tefillin, he says, Kosuv b'shimush rabba, the tefillin tzura de shin diyamina gimel reishe, v'dismola dalad reishe v'apich leis lon ba. Says Tosfos, quoting the shimush rabba, that on the tefillin, from the perspective of the person who's wearing the tefillin, the shin on the right side is a three-legged shin, and the shin on the left side is a four-legged shin. And here we have some examples of what that looks like. So on the left side, we have the three-legged shin. Oh, that's a little confusing. I probably should have thought this out better. But anyways, the left photo is a photo of the three-legged shin that is on the right side of the tefillin box, And on the right photo is a 4-legged shin that is on the left side of the tefillin box. The main thing there really, this was not meant to be confusing. The point is that in these two photos, you can see what a 3-legged shin and a 4-legged shin looks like. Now, I want to quickly hop over to the Mishnah Brura one more time and just look at some interesting halachas over here. So one interesting halacha is that it says, so the Mishnah Brura says, shin shel tefillin lechel Moshe Misinai. Okay. And it says, kimin shin, like a shin. Boletes be kimte or, that you basically pinch together. I think that's what it means. The hide to make the shin. Okay, fine. Now, says the Mishnah Brura, kimin shin, like a shin. The tmunas shinin shalanu shanu osim betfilan die. V'lo davka ksav stam mamish ela dugma. So let's go back to for a second. Very, very interesting. If you look at the shins that we just looked at, particularly if you look at the shin on the right, that's not like a shin that we write. Where do you ever see a shin like that? That's like so pointy. It's like a shin. It basically has 3 legs, but it's not necessarily. I think that's the point, right? But if you look at the one on the left, it's a little bit, it looks more like kind of like an actual letter shin. I didn't get an example of what I don't have an example of what an actual letter shin looks like, but I think Chabad tefillin, if I'm not mistaken, I think they actually literally have a letter, like a proper letter shin, not like a point at the bottom, but like, a proper letter shin. So the Mishnah Brura is saying here that there is a minute, right, that we have kimin shin. So I mean, it looks like a shin. It's got a few legs on it. But there are those who dafka try to get a proper shin on there. And again, I think Chabad tefillin have a proper shin on it. Now, again, I'm going weiter, and I'm going to go a little bit weiter in the Mishnah Brura. Boletes v'chuli v'im osha shin b'klaf acher b'hidbik b'devek alabayis posel. Now, this shin, as we're going to see in a minute, needs to be from the hide itself, from the bias itself. If you take a shin and glue it on to the shel rosh, that is going to be possible. You can't. It has to be from the shel rosh itself. And let's go weiter for a second. Mikimte or danish mekamet or be malket aidek fil shekofel or ache nice sipe ashin. I don't exactly understand what that means. I think it means you basically like kind of pinch out. You like pull out a shin. But what about to use a mold? What if you use a mold? So to use some kind of a mold that has the shin kind of pressed into it, and then you press it tightly against the bias, and then the memela, the it's kind of like a stamp, right? The shin then kind of pulls out from the mold. So the Taz and Magen Avram say that you should not do this. However, because of the Zeu Yosef here, that this is taka better, v'cheina minig poshit, and this is our minig kayom lasos b'dfus mipnei shaydeze yesh lator shim b'chul Yosef v'ziyuneh Yosef mishina mukmetes ba'or. That this is actually the preferred way to do it, and this is how we do it, right? What did he say? He says, right, v'cheina minig poshit kayom lasos b'dfus. This is the minig that how do we make the shins? We basically take some kind of a mold of the shin and we press it against. There's a lot of hard pressing. If you check out these videos on YouTube about making tefillin, there's like heavy kind of, I don't know if this would be considered heavy machinery, but I mean, they're working with very difficult hide. They're like pressing and really applying a lot of pressure to these hides. So part of one thing that they're doing with like clamps and all sorts of like heavy metal kind of stuff. And so they apply kind of this mold, this stamp to the tefillin, and they stamp out these shins from the hide itself. And with this, we'll get back to the Gemara. I just thought it was very interesting to see lemaisa about the different kinds of shins that there are for the tefillin and how they are made. And then finally, as we saw earlier, but we can have a look at again. If we go back to this photo with all the parts of the tefillin, we can see that the grooves on the shel rosh for you are kind of right that we talked about earlier. They go all the way down to the titura. Rav Dimi min Arda, Omar says Rav Dimi min Arda came the minkar lo tzarich, that so long as you can, right, if the point of the grooves are just to be sure that they are separate compartments, well, you don't necessarily need them to go all the way down to the titura. It's enough, as long as there's enough of a groove to be able to tell that there are grooves there. It's a different compartment. That's sufficient. It doesn't necessarily have to go. You don't necessarily have to be able to see them all the way down to the titura. But Amar Abai says, Abai, I kill for the tefillin tzarich lemivdike, that the cloth that the tefillin is written on, you have to check it. The dilma is reisa, to make sure that there are no holes in the cloth. Uvaina ksiva tama, because after all, we need a complete, right, uchsav tam. It needs to be a ksiva tama, a complete writing, vileka, and if there are holes in the cloth, well, maybe you're going to write a letter over a hole, and that letter will be deficient. Rav Dimi min Arda Omar lo tzarich kul misa badik lei, whereas Rav Dimi min Arda says, nish geferlach, even if there is a hole, you will be able to tell when you are writing over that hole, and you will discover it, and I guess probably, I don't know if you could fix it somehow or get rid of the cloth. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Rabbi Yitzchak ritzuris shchoris alachal Moshe Sinai, that the straps need to be black. Is alachal Moshe Sinai meisvei? We have a contradiction. Tefillin ein kosher oson ela b'minon. However, we have a contradiction that we have a brisa that tefillin, the straps, we only tie the tefillin with their own type. Ben Yerukis, Ben Shchoris, Ben Levonis. Whether they are green, whether they are black, whether they are white. So apparently they don't have to be black. They could be green or white. Adumis lo yasenu, lo yaise, but don't make it red. You don't want red straps. Because it's embarrassing. Right? Because you have a person who's wearing tefillin with red straps, maybe they'll think, oh, why are his straps all red? Maybe he's got like lots of scabs and he's bleeding all the time. V'davar acher, maybe he had bia with his wife when she was in Nida, and that's how his tefillin got red. These are very creative Yidden. These Yidden put the yentis in the bongo khan on Shabbos afternoon. They're definitely good competition. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't understand why you're saying that the straps need to be made of hide. After all, there was a Maisa with the student of Rabbi Kiva, Sha'aya kosher tefillah b'lashon shel tcheles, that he used for straps wool. Tcheles dyed wool. V'lo amelo davar. Rabbi Kiva didn't say anything. Efshir also tzadik roa tamido v'lo michabo. Rabbi Yehuda says what? You think that Rabbi Kiva, when he saw that his Talmud was wearing tefillin with woolen straps, if in fact woolen straps were possible, you think don't you think he would have said something? So clearly, the straps don't need to be made out of hide. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, Hein lo ra also v'imra also lo minicho. The fact of the matter is, Rabbi Kiva didn't notice. Rabbi Kiva didn't realize that this student was wearing tefillin made out of wool. If he did notice, he surely would have said something. There's also a Maisa that Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus' son, Horkinus, that he used for straps purple wool. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus didn't say anything. What, you think Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, when he saw that his son was wearing purple wool, not just any wool, purple wool, for his tefillin straps, don't you think he would have said something if it was a problem? They said to Rabbi Yehuda, Hein lo ra also v'imra also lo haya manicho. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus didn't realize that his son was wearing purple tefillin straps. If he did realize, he would have said something, because you need the straps to be leather. Nonetheless, what do we see? We see that tefillin straps can be green, tefillin straps can be white. They don't have to be black. No problem. The halachah Moshe Sinai that tefillin straps are black is on the outside. The halacha Moshe Messina is that on the outside, tefillin straps need to be black. On the inside, they could be white or green. Meaning, if you have, I imagine, it's probably both the shel yad and the shel rosh, I guess, but it's probably more obvious with the shel rosh, imagine, with the straps that kind of hang over right there, they hang over your chest and your stomach, right the front of your body, and you can kind of see the bottom side of it. So what are we saying? So the outside of it needs to be black, but the underside of it can be green, can be white. I guess it's tefillin shel yad also. Why did I specific? Okay, anyways, basically on tefillin straps, there is the outside, the part that people see, whether it's the tefillin shel yad, whether it's tefillin shel rosh, and there's the underside. So the black side, the outside needs to be black. The underside could be white or green. But if we're talking about the underside, so my gnai v'davar acher, well then why can't they be red either? We're so concerned about red. Who's seeing it? It's the underside. This is probably why I assume that we're talking about, this is probably why all this, I immediately said we're talking about the shel yad, shel rosh, because they sometimes flip over. But even so, I mean, you can see somebody putting on the tefillin shel yad, you could see the underside of it. But anyways, the tefillin shel rosh, kind of those straps, because they're just kind of dangling there, they tend to flip around more often. And anyways, even if it was the underside that was red, people will see that it's red and they'll start having all sorts of judgments about this fellow. Continues the Gemara, Tana tefillin merubo salachal Moshe Misinai, that tefillin need to be square is also a halacha leMoshe Misinai. Amar Papa says, Papa betifran uvalachsonon, that this applies also to their stitching, that when you stitch the tefillin, don't stitch too tight, that might pull against the squareness of them, of the boxes, or I think maybe even of the stitching, but everything needs to be square. We'll look at a slide in a second. And then that also applies to their diagonals. Basically, Pythagorean's theorem, kilu, that you should have the sides of the tefillin should be square, such that its diagonal should be Pythagorean's theoremable. Let's say that the following supports Rav Papa. There is a Mishnah in Masechta Megillah that says Tfilaso agula sakana b'imba mitzvah, that if a person's tefillin are round, it is a sakana and there's no mitzvah. What that means is that if the titura, if at the bottom, the part that rests upon the person's forehead is kind of like egg shaped, so then if you bump into something, that egg can kind of crack your skull. So my papa says, Papa Masizin Davida ki ameguza, that the Mishnah is talking about when it's kind of like a nut. It's like pointy like a nut, but round. But round might actually be okay, so it's not a raya. Okay, well, we just read a lot of stuff. Where are we? What am I looking for? This is what I'm looking for. The squares. Okay, so the pink lines are basically showing that the kitzitza, the length and width need to be square, need to be the same. The height, I believe, can be different. It doesn't have to have the same height. It doesn't have to be a cube per se, but the length and width of the kitzitza would be the same, the same size. Next, the golden arrow is pointing to where the stitching of the tefillin is. That the stitching, right? That you stitch closed the box, right? So you put in the parashiyot and you stitch you bend over, you bend over the titura, and then you stitch it closed. That stitching also needs to be square, right? And Papa said, make sure when you stitch it, don't pull too hard to make sure that they're going to be square. And the way I understand the rye that we tried to bring from Megillah was basically, I think the stitching, both where we see it on the top there, but also underneath the tefillin, the stitching is square there as well. And if it's round on the bottom, then you won't really, it'll be hard to make it square. If it's round, you need a flat bottom in order for the stitching to be square. So we wanted to say that from the fact that the Mishnah Megillah says that tefillin that has a round bottom is puzzle, so then that it's because the tefillin needs to be, the stitching needs to be square. I think that's how I understood it. It was a little bit difficult for me to understand that point. That's how I made sense of it. I hope it's accurate. And then also the titura itself needs to be square, which is what the white line is. right? The white line is showing that the titura is square. Now, remember I had pointed out earlier that where the strap is, there's a notch notched into where the strap is. Why is there a notch there? It's not for design. It's not just for like, I don't know, easier strap design or something. It's because we need the titura to be square. Now, obviously, the whole base there is not square because there's the extra part for the ma'abara, for the strap to go through. So what we do is we have an etch there to kind of like section off the ma'abara to indicate that that is its own section, but the square of the titura ends where the notch is notched out, and basically it's a square up to the notch, right? So if you exclude the notched out part and you exclude the ma'abara, so then the titura is also going to be a square. Amar Ravuna, says Ravuna, Tefillin kozman shepnei tavla kayemes ksheru. So says Ravuna, so long as the outside of the tefillin, we're talking about the tefillin shel rosh right now, so long as the outside, I imagine probably tefillin shel yad as well, as long as the outside is intact, then all good, right? But specifically, we're talking about, basically, the discussion ahead is going to be about tefillin shel rosh, that as long as from the outside everything looks good, it doesn't matter what's happening in the inside. So, for example, tefillin shel rosh, inside there's, right, tefillin shel rosh is 4 separate compartments, which means that inside, if you look, I actually didn't have a view from that angle of what does the tefillin shel rosh look like when it's open. I don't have a photo of that. But anyways, as you can imagine, it's 4 separate compartments. What if those compartments are broken? Rav Huna says it doesn't matter. As long as on the outside it looks good, that is sufficient. Again, Amar Rav Huna says, Rav Huna tefillin kozman she pnei tavla kayemes, so long as the look of the tablets, which I guess which seems to be a reference to the outside of the box, as long as it looks intact, that's sufficient. What's happening inside doesn't matter. It'll be kosher. Rav Chizda Amar says, Rav Chizda, nifsiku shtayim ksheris shalish psulis. If 2 of them, we'll look at a slide in a second to see what this looks like. If 2 of the inside compartments break, it's kosher. Shalish psulis, if 3 of them break, it is possible. Rava says, Rava, hada'amar shtayim ksheris, that when we say 2 of them are kosher, lo amarin ella zeh shelo keneged zeh. That's talking about when they are not opposite each other. Aval zeh keneged zeh psulis. But if they're opposite each other, then they are psulis. Okay, let's look at some slides. Okay, so here's a slide with 4 scenarios, 4 green sections. Each green section has, if you couldn't tell, I'm sorry, but it has a tefillin shel rosh on there. Now you'll notice that in these tefillin shel roshes that I have there, they are basically separate sections. There are 4 separate section compartments. I made them specifically with space in between them to make the point clear that each compartment is separate, which means that if there is a break, so for example, in the first section that says kosher on top, so in section number 1, in compartment number 1, there is a break in the right wall. That break is limited to the right wall itself. The compartment number 2 is completely intact. Its walls are completely fine because, again, there are 4 separate compartments, right? So it's not like if you live in an apartment building and you have a neighbor and you literally share a wall, and if you take an axe and break through the wall, you'll break through their wall as well. It's not like that. It's more like if you have 2 boxes that each have their own walls and you put them next to each other, they have separate walls. They're just next to each other. So here we have 4 separate compartments that are next to each other, and therefore, if you look at, for example, the green section number 1, which says kosher on top, so you see here that in compartment number 1 and in compartment number 3, there are breaks in their right walls, respectively. That's kosher because you don't have 2 compartments that are next to each other with breaks, right? You have compartment number 1 has a break, compartment number 3 has a break, compartment number 2 and compartment number 4 are completely 100% fine because they have their own walls that are completely intact. However, as Rav Chizda said, if you have 3 compartments that have breaks, so then it's going to be possible. As you see here, compartments 1, 2, and 3 all have breaks. so the tefillin is going to be pasul in this case. Now, Ravad explained Rav Chizda as saying, if you move now to green section number 3, so Ravad said that even when it comes to 2 breaks, if they are next to each other, if they're next to each other, so then it's still going to be possible, even though it's only 2. And Rashi gives two explanations for what that could be. Explanation number 1, we see here in green compartment number 3, which is that you have, for example, in compartment number 1, you have a break in its right wall, and in compartment number 2, you also have a break in its right wall. Even though the breaks are not opposite each other, because each one is in its own respective right wall, but because the 2 compartments are next to each other, compartments 1 and 2, so therefore it's going to be pasul. And what you see in the final green section is that another option of what it can mean is that literally the right wall of compartment number 1 and the left wall of compartment number 2 have cracks in them, so they're literally opposite each other, so that is going to be pasul. Okay. Now, now, even when we say that it is a problem when you have these issues with zeh keneged zeh, that's only if they are new tefillin. But it's no problem if it's old. Now, the Gemara is going to give 2 tests that you could do to test if your tefillin is considered new or old. These tests, I believe, are not relevant for us nowadays because our tefillin are very, very hard. But theirs, I guess, were more stretchy. Amalei Abaye, Rav Yosef says, Abaye, Rav Yosef, Damyon, Chadatza. How do we know if we're talking about new? Damyon, Atiksa. I don't know if we're talking about old. Amalei Rav Yosef says, Kol Echet ki mislei be shilcha. If you could pull the hide, the box, Hadr Cholim, it'll go back. If you can kind of stretch it, and it'll go back to its place. Atikta, that means that it's old. Vida Chadatza, otherwise it is new. Vinamir, alternatively, Kol Echad Dichi mislei be masna. Ase abasre chadatza v'idach atikta. Alternatively, you could do like a tug of war, kind of like pull on the, one person pulls the box, the other one pulls the strap, and it doesn't crack, it doesn't break. So then that means it's new. But if it breaks, I guess, then it's old. But again, these apparently are not relevant to us nowadays because our tefillin are much, much harder, apparently. Friends, and now we're going to talk a bit about the straps of the tefillin. Abaye, Ava Yosef, Kame, the Rav Yosef, Abaye was sitting before Rav Yosef. Ifsik le ritzua de tefile, and the strap of his tefillin broke. So Abaye asks Rav Yosef, can I just tie it together? The strap broke. Can I just tie it in a knot? Fixed. Rav Yosef says, the pasuk says, ukshartom, that the kesher needs to be whole, meaning either that it has to be beautiful, and tying it together is going to look kind of not so beautiful. Alternatively, that it has to be whole, and it's no longer whole if it broke. Can you, would you be able to sew the 2 pieces together, and that the stitching would be on the inside, so that from the outside you wouldn't necessarily see the stitching per se? And Ravashi says, why don't you go see what the people do? This is Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos what this means. Rashi says, people don't do this, therefore don't do it. Tosfos says, no, there could be some people who could do it, and therefore it's okay. Okay. Basically, Rashi said, go see what the people do. I guess if they do it, do it. If they don't do it, don't do it. Papa says, Papa gardume ritzuis ksheris. Papa says that if, for example, in the shel rosh, under the knot that we'll learn about tomorrow, the straps break and you're left with like strap stubs. Papa says ksheris. V'lav milsi, but that's not the case. It's not correct. Mide amre b'nei Reb Chia, from the fact that the sons of Reb Chia say gardume tcheles v'gardume ezov ksherin, that specifically by tzitzis, if the tzitzis strings break and you're left with stumps, those are ksheris. Alternatively, the ezov, the hyssop that's used for example, to sprinkle on the mitzora and on a tmei meis with for paraduma, mechatos. So if they break and there are stumps, they are ksher. In those cases, they are ksher because they are tashmishe mitzvah. But over here, tefillin is considered a tashmishe kedusha. It itself is considered kedusha. It itself is considered holy, and therefore because the straps are in service of something that's considered a gufo kadosh, therefore stubs would not be sufficient. By sprinkling mechatos and by tzitzis, it would be acceptable, but not by tefillin. Okay. Mechad the islu shiura. This implies that there's some kind of length that is meant for the straps. That they need to be a certain length. Right? We're saying that the stumps are good or no good, and implying that they have to be a certain length. What is a certain length? Says Rambam Chama Amr Shlakish until the etzbat strada. It's machlokes in Rashi and Tosfos if this is talking about your index finger or if it's talking about your middle finger. Rav Kahana machvei kafuf, Rav Ashi machvei poshit. Rav Kahana basically indicated bent, and Rav Ashi indicated extended. What does that mean? It means, well, if you have like a strap or something and you bend it, so it's going to be shorter. If you have a strap and you make it straight, it's going to be as large as it can be. So basically, if you imagine your index finger, okay? So it'll be the same thing for your middle finger. But let's talk about your index finger. So if you talk about between your index finger and your middle finger, that distance is much less than between your thumb and your index finger, right? Again, the index finger to the middle finger is much shorter than from the index finger to your thumb. And therefore, who is this? Rav Kahana machvei kafuf. Rav Kahana was indicating bent, i.e. the smaller distance, i.e. from your index finger to your middle finger. Rav Ashi machvei posh. Rav Ashi indicated extended, i.e. from your index finger to your thumb. Now Tosfos says it's not talking about your index finger, it's talking about your middle finger. So it would just be the two options there are basically also from your index finger to your middle finger would be the shorter one, but the longer one would be from the tip of your middle finger to the tip of your thumb, so it'll be a little bit longer. That is the shear, I guess, the minimum shear, I guess, for the ritzuis, for the straps. Now, Tosfos quotes a few different shitas, right? He quotes one shita that one of them should reach to your belly button, and the other one should reach to your heart. He quotes another shita from the Shimusha Rabbah that the right strap should go down to your bris milah, and the left strap should go to your heart. And I believe that the what does the Mishnah Berurah say? The Shulchan Aruch says that where are we here? Great. Shulchan Aruch says that the ritzuas should be until the v'yagiu ad atabor, that the ritzuas in front should go until your belly button, or a little bit before them. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes that the right strap should go ad atabor till your belly button, v'shel smol ad achazeh. The left strap should be until your chest. That the right strap should go until your bris milah, v'shel smol ad tabor, and the left one until your belly button. But either way, if it's longer, that is fine. But I do think that generally, we do have the right strap, I believe, goes down longer than the left strap does. And then to wrap up for this daf, Rabba Katalu Masliach Umasazlu, Rabba would basically take the straps and put them behind his back. My bread diravna Ovid. No, where am I? Rabba Katalu Ufashit Vashadilu. Rabba would put on his tefillin, and then the shel rosh straps he would put behind his shoulders, behind his back. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Katalu Maslu. Rav Acha bar Yaakov would braid them, I think, in front of him. My bread diravna Ovid Kedidon. My bread diravna did like we did, that he would basically put them in front of him over his chest, like we do. Friends, we are going to hold it here for the Daf Lamed of Masechta Menachos Shish. We covered a lot of ground today. Friends, on Daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Menachos, we learned about the parashiyot of Tefillin, that the shel yad is written on one cloth and it is put into a bias with one compartment. And if it's written on multiple cloths, Rabbi Yehuda says you should connect them. Rabbi Yossi says you don't need to connect them. Although we did say that in the end, Rabbi Yossi had said that Rabbi Yehuda had basically agreed with him that you don't need to connect them. The shel rosh is written on 4 cloths in 4 boxes made with one hide. Rashi says that the order of the hides, and these are Rashi Tefillin, is Kadesh, Vayakivyacha, Shema, Vayam Shema, going from right to left. Rabbeinu Tam says that it from right to left it's Kadesh Shama and then Shema, and we learned about the Tosfos for their different rationales. We learned about the titura of the tefillin, which is the part that wraps around and closes the tefillin. Rashi says it's one hide. Tosfos says it could be multiple hides. The Mishnah Berurah had said it could be multiple hides that are either sewed or even glued together, but still you should prefer to have one. Still, it would be preferable to have one hide just because there are those shitas that require it, and better if you can to do like those shitas and do it with just one hide. The ma'abart of the tefillin is where the straps go through. The shin of the tefillin of the shel rosh is pulled out or stamped with a press. We saw the Mishnah Berurah says that nowadays it's actually preferable. The minhag is to use the press because you can get a nicer product that way. The shin on the right side has 3 legs, and on the left side it has 4 legs. The groove is in the tefillin shel rosh. Abaye says that they need to go down to all the way down to the stitching. Rav Dimi ben Ardoa says even a little bit of groove is enough. When it comes to square tefillin, the kitzitza, the titura, and even the stitching need to be square. And when it comes to the straps of the tefillin, the straps need to be black. And we talked about different shiurim of how long they should be. One shiur that I actually forgot to mention is that the width of the strap is more than a wheat kernel and less than a barley kernel. If it's more than that, then it is kosher as well. And in terms of the length of the straps, we saw different opinions. One is like Rashi had talked about between maybe your thumb and your index finger, or your index finger and your middle finger. Tosfos said it may be mentioned from your thumb to your middle finger. We had seen to your belly button, above your belly button, one down, one to your belly button, one to your chest, one to your bris milah, one to your heart, one to your bris milah, one to your belly button. But as long as you have them probably long enough, it seems like you should be okay. Friends, that was Daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Menachos. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you tomorrow. Cheers.